Before we dive into this absolutely mind-blowing story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and smash the like button right now because trust me, you're going to want to stay tuned for every shocking detail of this case. In September of 2016, a 27-year-old naturalist photographer named Kira Gaines embarked on what should have been a simple 2-day solo hiking trip in Colorado's San Juan Mountains. She wanted to capture the stunning autumn foliage, that golden glow that makes the forests look absolutely magical. Kira checked into the Snow Creek Motel, paid for just one night, and told the front desk clerk that she was heading to Mount Sneffels the next morning because apparently the light there was absolutely perfect for photography. The motel employee remembered Kira as calm, confident, and well-prepared. She was wearing a bright yellow jacket, hiking pants, and carried a brand new backpack. When she asked about a shortcut to the viewpoint, the receptionist mentioned an old trail that went through a gorge, warning her it could be slippery after rain. Kira just smiled and thanked her before heading out. The next morning around 7 a.m., several people spotted Kira, including a local grocery store owner and a park ranger named Sophia Reyes. Sophia remembered that Kira was buying water and chocolate bars, asking about the best spots to photograph the autumn forest. Sophia warned her about rocky outcrops along the shadow trail, but Kira just nodded, mentioning she had plenty of experience hiking in the Rocky Mountains. She looked calm, even excited, like someone who knew exactly where they were going to find something special. Kira was supposed to return to Silver Springs by Sunday evening, but when 2 days passed without any contact, her 35-year-old brother Mark Gaines from Denver drove down to the mountain town and filed a report with the San Miguel County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Greg Maxwell, a 20-year veteran, initially thought this was just another case of someone overestimating their abilities in the mountains. But when they discovered that Kira wasn't responding even on her satellite messenger, which she always carried on hikes, the situation suddenly became very serious. At 1 p.m. that same day, a patrol team headed out to check her route. They found Kira's white Honda CR-V in the parking lot near the main trailhead, not far from the start of the Stony Pass Trail. The car was locked, no keys were found inside, and her phone was in the glove compartment with a dead battery. The interior was clean and tidy, showing absolutely no signs of panic or rushing. On the passenger seat, investigators found a printed map of the route with several yellow markers, and one of them marked a trail that branched off from the main path labeled Shadow's Path. Ranger Reyes, who was examining the car with the sheriff, immediately recognized that trail name. According to her, Shadow's Path was an old, nearly forgotten trail that wound through a gorge to a small clearing at the mountain's base. There used to be a hunting lodge there built in the 1950s, and some tourists, especially photographers, tried to find it because of legends about the house being bathed in perfect light during fall. Sophia realized this was probably the place Kira had been asking about that morning. The official search launched that evening with a rescue team of 12 people, including rangers, volunteers, and dog handlers. The dogs quickly picked up Kira's scent from the car and led the team deep into the forest. For the first several hundred yards, the route was clear with damp ground showing visible shoe tracks. But then the path narrowed dramatically, winding between stone walls and steep slopes. About half a mile from the trail's beginning, the dogs lost the scent near a mountain stream that had overflowed after recent rains. The water had washed away all traces. Here, among the wet moss, one volunteer spotted a small piece of red cloth deeply embedded in the ground, like it had been there for a long time. The material looked like it came from cheap tourist gear, bright and synthetic, but definitely not part of Kira's outfit since her clothes were yellow, black, and green. Everything else pointed to someone simply vanishing into thin air. No footprints, no broken branches, complete silence. No one saw her on the main trail or in town after that morning. The parking lot cameras only showed her arriving at 7:20 a.m., and then nothing. Sheriff Maxwell officially opened a missing person case. The next day, the search continued from the air with a helicopter flying over Sneffels slopes, but they found no trace of a campsite, tent, or brightly colored clothing. The weather was getting worse, and the first night frosts were hitting the mountains. Mark stayed in town, posting his sister's photos at bus stops and near shops. In every photo, she was smiling in her yellow jacket, holding a camera that reflected the sun. That's how everyone who saw her that September morning remembered her. Calm, focused, ready to go. Ranger Reyes spent that entire week in the forest with almost no sleep. She told her colleagues she couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Kira. It was like Kira was in a hurry, like she knew exactly where she was going, to a place no one had found in a long time. On the evening of the fourth day of searching, the mountain wind brought the smell of dampness and snow. The exhausted, soaked team returned to where the trail had broken off. The stream was making noise, the moss shimmered in their lantern light, and that same red thread glistened among the stones, the only thing indicating someone else had been in these woods. October 2016 arrived cold. The first snow had already fallen in the San Juan Mountains, and the yellow leaves Kira had come to photograph were disappearing under white frost. Her name became known throughout the county. Newspapers wrote about the missing Denver photographer, and TV channels filmed stories about the mysterious mountain incident. The white CRV found near the parking lot was eventually transported to the police garage. It was examined multiple times, but there wasn't a single trace, no fingerprints, no foreign hair, no DNA. The car was as clean as if it had just been washed. The search continued for 3 weeks. Dog handlers from New Mexico, volunteers from search and rescue services, and even a group of climbers who knew Sneffels slopes well joined the operation. 2 helicopters took to the skies, and over the weekend they were joined by a drone provided by a local photographer. It flew low over the gorge, filming everything, but the video showed nothing but branches and cloud shadows. The only evidence that could be tested was that red piece of cloth found near the creek. The state lab determined it was part of a cheap tourist keychain sold across the country. Similar keychains could be bought at any souvenir shop, even at the same store where Kira had bought water before her hike. That's where the thread broke. Sheriff Greg Maxwell didn't hide his disappointment. The report stated the search area covered almost 40 square miles of forest. They checked every cave, abandoned hut, even old mine entrances left by miners from the last century. All in vain. No sign of Kira. Mark Gaines stayed at the Snow Creek Motel and went out on his own to search when the official teams returned to base. He walked the same trails with his sister's map in hand, looking at every rock, searching for anything that could give him an answer. According to the motel owner, he barely slept, sitting in the lobby at night with his laptop comparing maps, checking routes. In an interview with journalists, he said only one thing: if she went there, then she had a reason and I have to find it. In November, temperatures dropped below zero. When the first snow turned into dense drifts, the search operation had to be called off. The rangers left markings on the trees to return in spring and continue from the same location. The sheriff called it a temporary pause. For Mark, it sounded like a goodbye. In December, the case was officially transferred from search to criminal status. In the police archive, it received a new number and a thick folder with photos, diagrams, maps, and reports. Sheriff Maxwell didn't close the case but acknowledged the active phase was over. There were no suspects. There were no witnesses. Winter brought silence to Silver Springs. Tourist lodges emptied. Motels closed some rooms. The locals saw Mark a few more times. He came to the coffee shop near the ranger station asking if anyone had found things in the forest. The answer was always the same: no. Then he disappeared for a few weeks, returning in spring when the snow began to melt. In March 2017, the rescue service resumed the search, this time with drones, thermal cameras, and dogs trained to detect human remains. But the ground, softened by meltwater, hid everything under a layer of clay and leaves. There were no results. Ranger Sofia Reyes kept trying to find new clues. She visited hunting huts, talked to local loggers working on the slopes, asked if they'd seen anyone else's equipment or fresh tracks in forbidden areas. They all answered the same: no one, nothing. In her report, she wrote a short phrase: the route gives no answers. Meanwhile, Mark tried to move on with his life. Back in Denver, he continued working, but every week he came to the mountains. Sometimes he spent the night in a tent near the highway. Sometimes he just sat in his car at the beginning of Shadow Trail watching the sun rise over Sneffels. His friends said he began avoiding people. On social media, he posted only photos of the forest. No comments, no words. In spring, when the last snows melted in the county, the sheriff called a final meeting. It was decided that further investigation would only continue if new evidence emerged. No body, no belongings, no signs of a struggle were found. The official version remained the same: disappearance under unspecified circumstances. In June, volunteers went to the forest again, but this time they weren't rescuers. They were Kira's friends, fellow photographers who wanted to at least symbolically complete her journey. They went up to where the trail broke off and left a small stone mound there. They put a yellow ribbon with her name on it. The summer passed unchanged. In August, Mark received a call from Sheriff Maxwell. He said the search was complete and there was no new information. It was an unofficial but definitive end to the active phase of the investigation. September winds brought cold again. In the first days of fall, it snowed again over Silver Springs and the mountains were covered with a thin white layer. It seemed like the forest itself had put an end to the question, burying all answers under ice. Shadow's path remained empty, and the old stream that had once washed away her trail quietly murmured somewhere below, as if to remind that sometimes nature speaks only in the language of silence. On September 27, 2017, around noon, two hunters from San Miguel County, Edward Miller and George Kane, were combing the northern slopes of Mount Sneffels. The fall hunting season was just beginning and the weather was favorable. Dry air, no wind, only the smell of pine needles and damp earth. They were following a wounded deer that had slipped into the thicket after being shot. After a few hundred yards, the forest suddenly parted, revealing a small clearing that wasn't marked on any tourist map. There, among the aspen thickets, stood an old hut. It looked like it hadn't been touched by human hands for decades. The roof was partially caved in, the windows were smoky, and the doors were warped. Yet it gave off something that made the men stop. The smell. Heavy, sweet, with a hint of rot. George later recalled thinking of a dead animal left in the sun. They came closer. There was a chill coming from under the crack in the door. Edward walked around the hut and looked through the broken window. What he saw made him retreat. A woman in a bright yellow jacket was sitting on an old wooden chair at a table in the center of the room. Her head was slightly tilted to the side. Her hands rested in her lap, and in front of her was a plate with a dark, decomposed mass that might have once been food. Next to it was a glass with a cloudy liquid. Opposite her was another place setting. The hunters didn't go inside. One of them called the sheriff's office. The report states that the first call about the possible discovery of human remains in the national forest was received at 13 hours 42 minutes. 2 hours later, Sheriff Greg Maxwell's team arrived at the site. They were accompanied by forensic scientists, a photographer, and a medical examiner, Dr. Allison Moore. The path to the clearing was difficult. A narrow path overgrown with moss, no signs that anyone had walked it. The hut was surrounded and filming began before the entrance. Maxwell, according to his colleagues, was silent, looking at the wooden walls blackened by time. He remembered the name of the woman they had been looking for a year. When the door was opened, the smell was almost unbearable. The air inside was dry and frozen like in a vault. There were cobwebs on the walls and a layer of dust on the floor. However, the room itself didn't look abandoned. The table was straight, the chairs were arranged symmetrically, and there were no animal tracks or debris on the floor. Everything seemed surprisingly orderly. A woman sat at the table under dim light coming through a hole in the roof. She was wearing a mustard yellow jacket, the same one her brother had described in his statement. Her hair hung in motionless strands. Her face was partially dried, but her features remained recognizable. The documents later stated that the body was in a state of natural mummification caused by the dry mountain air. There were 2 plates, 2 forks, and 2 knives on the table. The food had turned into a black crust and the glasses were covered with mold. Opposite the woman was an empty chair. Only on its seat was a small red net folded flat like a gift. The material was familiar, the same fibers that had once been brought from the place where the trail had broken off. The forensic expert examined the body on the spot. His preliminary conclusion was that there were no external injuries. The bones were intact. There were no tears in the clothes. There were no traces of rope or metal on the wrists that could indicate she was held by force. Everything pointed to the fact that the woman was just sitting at the table and died. An old floorboard cracked under the sheriff's feet. When one of the forensic scientists picked it up, they found a small metal box under the floor, but inside was only dust and a few old nails. On the bed in the corner was a neatly folded sleeping bag with an empty backpack with a tourist brand logo next to it. Next to it was a camera without a memory card. Maxwell ordered to close the perimeter and work carefully. Every detail was recorded. Every centimeter was photographed. The footage, which later became part of the archive, shows how the yellow jacket contrasted with the dark wood of the walls, and the red mesh on the chair looked like it was left on purpose, a kind of signature. Dr. Moore noted in the report, "The body posture is not accidental. The spine is straight and the hands are folded in the lap. This is not typical for a person dying of natural causes." Everyone noticed this. She didn't fall or slip, as if she was waiting. There were canned food, bottles of water, and even a first aid kit on the shelves in the hut. Everything was neatly arranged. Some of the food had expired several years ago, which indicated that the supplies could have belonged to someone who had lived there for a long time. But there were no personal belongings, documents, or traces of another person's presence. The forensic team found only one shoe print near the door, a clear, deep one that had been made a long time ago. Based on its size, they assumed it was a man's. It was not possible to grow the sample. The soil was too dry. When the body was taken out, everyone was silent. The hunters stood aside. They didn't know that they were the first people in a year to see Kira Gaines. Her body was put in a black bag and sent to the Denver morgue for examination. Sheriff Maxwell remained at the scene. He stood by the open door looking at the table. 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 spoons, 1 empty chair, and the netting was bright red, as if waiting for someone to sit down across from her again. The sun was already sinking behind the peaks when they left the clearing. The report noted that the hut was located about 8 miles from the nearest marked trail, in a place where the topography and trees created a natural curtain. Without chance, it would have been impossible to find it. That night, a new page appeared in Kira Gaines' case file. In the status column, for the first time, instead of missing, they wrote found. But no one could answer under what circumstances. The forest brought her back, and with her, it left a mystery that was worse than death itself. After the discovery of Kira Gaines' body, the forest around Sneffels was fenced off with yellow tape. Within the first 3 days, the cabin became the main focus of investigators, forensic scientists, and journalists. Representatives of federal agencies traveled to Silver Springs from all over the state as the case sparked a public outcry. The press wrote about a spooky dinner in the Colorado mountains, and television crews were on duty in the parking lot near the highway. Sheriff Greg Maxwell personally led the search. He knew that, in cases like this, the little things make all the difference. The first hours after the scene was closed showed that the cabin was no accident. The windows were covered with heavy wooden shutters that could only be opened from the outside. The bolts were crudely made but strong. There were no locks or pins on the inside of the door. This meant only one thing: the woman could not have left on her own. During the inspection of the attic, the forensic team came across a small handmade ventilation system. The opening was brought out under the roof, and a small lever was fixed on the inside. It was probably used to bring in fresh air, which explained the condition of the body. It had dried out, not decomposed. Someone had thought of this in advance. In the pantry, they found a supply of canned food, water, and a first aid kit. Several cans had production dates on them, 2015 and 2016. The canned food was undamaged, arranged evenly, and the labels were turned around. There were bottles of water of various brands on the shelves, not a single dust particle. Everything looked as if someone was preparing for a long stay but suddenly disappeared. The most interesting discovery was made in the corner under the floor. One of the experts noticed a faint echo when he tapped the boards with a metal probe. After dismantling the floor fragment, they pulled out an old gray laptop. The model was outdated, the case was scratched, but inside it was quite working. The only thing missing was the hard disk. Traces of unscrewed screws showed that it had been removed deliberately. A thin film of dust remained on the keyboard cover, except for the area under the S and L keys, as if the owner had often pressed them. There was a pillow in the corner of the bed and a hair on it. It was light, almost white, longer than Kira's average hair length. The sample was packed in a separate container. The forensic laboratory had to determine whether it belonged to the woman or to another person. When the forensic experts examined the hut in its entirety, it became obvious that this was not the place of an accidental death. It had been lived in not for a short time but for weeks. The order, tidiness, and neatly stacked equipment all contradicted the idea of an escape or an accident. Traces of wax were found on the table next to the dishes as if candles had been lit. On the wall near the door was a hook for a lantern. Investigators from the Federal Bureau joined the next day. They checked the county's land registers. The plot on which the hut stood once belonged to a private logging company that went bankrupt more than 2 decades ago. Since then, the building had remained unowned, and official maps had not mentioned it. Meanwhile, the body was being examined in Denver. Medical examiner Dr. Allison Moore noted that the state of mummification preserved most of the tissues. There were no signs of violence, bruises, or fractures. There were no signs of restraints on the hands. The skin analysis showed long-term vitamin deficiency and dehydration. The woman could have been in isolation for at least several weeks before her death. During the autopsy, another detail was discovered. There were remnants of a powerful sleeping pill in her stomach and blood. The concentration was higher than the therapeutic norm, but not enough to kill immediately. Experts suggested that death was caused by an overdose or a combination of dehydration and the medication. However, it remained unclear whether Kira took the drug herself or whether someone else gave it to her. Mark Gaines arrived at the morgue for official identification. According to the staff, he didn't dare to enter the room for a long time. When he saw his sister, he recognized her immediately by her jacket, by a thin mole on her neck. After the procedure, he was unable to speak. The report only states, "Confirmed identity, refused to comment further." On the same day, the sheriff's office received a forensic report. It emphasized that the design of the door indicated that the person was in a confined space with no way out. The marks on the wood indicated that the bolt had been opened repeatedly from the outside. This meant that someone had come to the hut after Kira's death or even before it. Based on the data he collected, Maxwell formed a first working version. The woman could have been kept alive in the hut. She was brought food and water, perhaps talked to. Then, death, not necessarily violent. The scene with the table, the 2 sets of dishes, the red netting, everything pointed to a person who not only killed but created his own ritual. Federal experts checked the prints from the surfaces on the dishes, bottles, and lids. All the matches were Kira's alone. This meant that the perpetrator either wore gloves or carefully cleaned up after himself. On the evening of the 3rd day of searching for evidence, a small campfire was found in the woods half a mile from the hut. Nearby was a tin can with the remains of a rubber glove finger. The DNA remains were unsuitable for analysis due to temperature and time. All the reports repeated the same phrase: the scene was staged. Kira Gaines didn't just die. Her death was staged as part of someone's twisted plan. Someone came in here, opened the shutters, ventilated, arranged the dishes, and possibly sat in front of the dead woman talking to her. After the search was completed, Maxwell personally ordered the hut to be closed with wooden shields. He realized that this house was not just a crime scene. It was a trap created by a mind that wanted control and solitude. And now he had to find the one who called it communication. A week had passed since Kira Gaines' body was removed from the woods. The town of Silver Springs was slowly returning to normal life, but tension reigned at the police station. Sheriff Greg Maxwell didn't believe that what had happened was an accident. His experience told him that such scenes are not created by nature. They are created by people, quiet, careful, and very methodical. The sheriff's office was filled with boxes of archives. Investigators were looking through old cases of missing tourists. Over the past 15 years, at least several people had disappeared within a 100-mile radius. Most cases were explained as accidents, others were forgotten. But now, after the discovery in the cabin, Maxwell demanded that each case be reviewed again. 2 stories were found in the protocols that were too similar to this one. In 2011, a young photographer from Durango disappeared. Her car was found near a trail, her belongings untouched. 3 years later, a man from New Mexico who was traveling alone disappeared without a trace. Both he and she were engaged in landscape photography. Their bodies were never found. At the time, no one connected these cases, but now the similarities were obvious. Lone hikers, cameras, the fall season, a forest where no one heard screams. To check whether the hut might have been known before, investigators turned to the land archive. In old documents stored at the county courthouse, they found a record. The building belonged to the Sun Valley Timber Company, a logging company that had ceased operations more than 20 years ago. The land was transferred to state ownership, but no control inspections of the territory were conducted after the bankruptcy. According to reports, there were several ancillary structures on the site that were supposed to be dismantled, but in practice no one did. So the cabin was left unattended, hidden among the dense spruce trees. Maxwell ordered to check all other abandoned buildings in the area. The Rangers mapped more than 24 such places. Most of them had long been covered by snow or destroyed by fire, but a few, according to locals, were still standing. It was then that the name of an old forester, Walter Hayes, began to come up in conversations. Walter lived on the edge of Silver Springs in a wooden house near the road to the pass. He was in his 80s and had been working in these forests since they were used to cut timber for the same company. Maxwell sent 2 assistants to help him. According to the detectives, Walter didn't want to talk at first. But when he heard what kind of cabin they were talking about, he was silent for a long time, then said, "You are 10 years too late." His testimony was recorded verbatim. He said that a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, traces of an outsider began to appear in the forest. They were not tourists. Someone was moving quietly, leaving crumpled grass near abandoned huts, sometimes the remains of fires, but no waste or garbage. One day in late fall, Walter saw this man from afar. He was standing on a hill in the fog, wearing camouflage with a large gray backpack behind him. He was thin, tall, and had a hood over his face. Walter shouted to him, but the stranger didn't even turn. He simply disappeared between the trees. A few months later, the forester came across his tracks again, this time near the stream where they had once searched for Kira. An empty metal can was lying in the snow and a large shoe print was nearby. He saved these coordinates in his notebook but didn't tell anyone, thinking that he was just another hermit. During the conversation, Walter recalled that people in the area called this unknown man in their own way, the Shadow Hunter. They spoke about him in whispers back when tourists disappeared in the mountains from time to time. They said that he had been living in the forest for years, watching travelers, but not hunting the beast. "He watches how people behave," said Walter. "How they walk, where they sit, how they eat. It's like he's studying them." His description coincided with testimonies that no one had previously linked together. In the old protocols, they found references to a strange man who was seen near the trails a few days before the tourists disappeared. One fisherman said that he felt someone watching him from the trees, but he didn't see anyone. Another woman said that during a hike, she noticed a man's shoe print next to her camp, although she was sure she had spent the night alone. Gradually, a picture began to emerge from the fragments. Someone had been living in the forest for years, using old huts as shelters. He avoided contact but left behind signs, neat, orderly, as if he also followed a certain ritual. In the report the sheriff sent to the Federal Bureau, the phrase "possible serial watcher" appeared for the first time. Alleged serial observer. This term was used to describe a person who systematically follows a certain type of victim but doesn't always make contact with them. The FBI agreed to join the investigation, considering the theory that an unknown man was operating in the Colorado woods, carefully selecting his victims. Maxwell reread the reports at night. One detail struck him. In each case, it was autumn, loneliness, and photography. All the disappeared had cameras with them. Now he saw this not as a coincidence but as a key. Perhaps someone was not just studying people but recording them. The rangers who knew the area well began to call the unknown man the same name as Walter, the Shadow Hunter. This name remained in the reports officially. A new tab was added to the Kira Gaines case file. Related disappearances. Contained 3 names, but no one knew how many there really were. All attempts to find new footprints in the forest failed. However, an old forester said one thing which was recorded verbatim. "If he is still there, you will not find him. He sees you before you get close. And if he starts looking again, it means that the choice has already been made." The old man's words became a warning to the sheriff. There were no more coincidences in the case of Kira Gaines, only silence, the forest, and a ghost that moved between them as if it were still watching. 2 weeks had passed since the body was found. The computer forensics lab in Denver was working nonstop. On the expert's desk was a laptop found under the floor of the hut. The device looked old but well preserved. The keys were slightly worn, the case was scratched, and there were still fingerprints on the screen. The main problem was the missing hard disk. But during a detailed inspection, the specialist noticed that the system was storing a backup copy of the data on an internal memory module which the owner didn't seem to know how to remove. For several days, the experts tried to break the encryption. The algorithm turned out to be complex. Dozens of password levels, fake directories, and decoy files. When the protection was eventually removed, they found a structure with hundreds of folders with names consisting only of numbers. Each contained dozens of photos. These were pictures of people, mostly tourists traveling alone. All the shots were taken from a distance through a long focus lens or binoculars with a built-in camera. People didn't look into the lens. Someone was making coffee near the tent. Someone was stopping to tie their shoes. Someone was sitting on a rock with a phone in their hand. None of the photos showed the author of the pictures. The photos were numbered, dated, and some were accompanied by short notes. Object 12, not suitable. Object 15, couple not interesting. Object 17, perfect. It was under this number that a series of shots with Kira Gaines was discovered. She was shot from different angles by the car on the trail during a lunch stop. The date was taken a few days before her disappearance. The specialist who conducted the decryption noted in his report that the style of shooting indicates systematic surveillance. The perpetrator spent time, planned, and moved with the victims but remained invisible. Among the documents stored next to the photos was an untitled text file. It was opened in a common editor. Turned out to be a diary. Short, cold entries similar to field reports. Subject 11, male, age 40. Not interesting, overly talkative. Subject 12, strong, carries a weapon, rejected. Subject 17, female, independent, focused, observation in progress, ideal candidate. No emotions or comments, only dates, coordinates, and observations. It was clear that the author perceived people not as individuals but as targets for experimentation. Sheriff Maxwell, having received the report from the expert, invited Mark Gaines to his office. According to eyewitnesses, Kira's brother looked at the photo printouts for a long time. In most of them, the sister didn't even realize that she was being filmed. The report states, the reaction of the relative was depressed. He expressed a desire to know the name of the person who did it. Further inspection revealed another layer of encrypted data. It contained not photos but scanned newspaper clippings. The articles dated from the early 2000s. They described a tragedy that occurred in one of the national parks in Montana. According to the publications, a young woman, a tourist who was caught in a sudden snowstorm, died during a winter hike. Her body was found 3 days later in a field tent. She was sitting at a folding table with 2 plates and 2 mugs in front of her. The investigation concluded that the woman was waiting for someone, perhaps her companion, who never returned. One of the articles contained an old black and white photo from the scene of the tragedy. A room in a tent, the face of the deceased, frozen dishes, a scene that was eerily similar to the one that was later recreated in Kira Gaines's hut. For Maxwell, this was a turning point. It was now clear that the killer had not acted chaotically. He was imitating something he had seen before, perhaps an event that had made a deep impression on him in the past. Experts called this behavior repetition syndrome. A person who has had a traumatic experience tries to recreate it again, controlling the course of events. But in this case, everything looked different. The perpetrator was not just repeating the scene, he was improving it. When analyzing the metadata from the files, it turned out that most of the photos were taken with the same camera, the model of which was discontinued more than a decade ago. This meant that the criminal had not changed his toolkit for years, using the same devices. He didn't leave digital traces on the network, didn't connect the computer to the internet. That's why investigators dubbed him an unofficial nickname, Digital Ghost. In one of the text files, they found a longer entry that stood out among the short notes. It was about loss and memory debt. The author wrote that the first one was left in the snow and that now everyone has their place at the table. This was the only phrase that had an emotional connotation. Experts recognized it as key to understanding the motive. The FBI, having received a copy of the materials, sent a request to Montana to check the data on the woman who died 15 years ago. However, until the results came back, Maxwell focused on what he already had in his hands. Dozens of photographs, a cold diary, and one story that someone had repeated over and over again. Mark Gaines didn't take part in the investigation, but he stayed in town. He came to the police station, looked at copies of the photos, and tried to understand what his sister and that old tourist had in common. His words were recorded in the report. He could not take his eyes off the 2 photographs. Both women were sitting in the same way, as if they were waiting for someone. When the experts finished their work, They concluded that the laptop was not just a data storage device. It was an archive of observations created over many years. And each new victim is an attempt to recover something that was once lost. In the sheriff's office, Maxwell stared at a photo of the cabin for a long time. Next to it was a yellowed newspaper clipping found in his laptop. Both scenes were identical, and somewhere between them was the shadow of a man who was not hunting but recreating his own memory, remaining invisible even when his past had already become a digital trail. 3 weeks had passed since the laptop from the cabin revealed its secrets. The FBI had officially joined the investigation, and the Silver Springs Sheriff's Office was now silent, with only the rustle of paper and the click of typewriters. The Kira Gaines case had become something more. It was no longer an isolated tragedy but part of a long, elaborate story that someone had been writing for years. A profiler arrived from Washington, D.C., Dr. Evelyn Carr, a behavioral health specialist. She was given full access to the materials. Photos from the laptop, text files, newspaper clippings, and copies of reports on previous disappearances. Her task was not only to create a psychological portrait, but also to understand the logic of the person hiding behind the shadow hunter mask. The profiler worked for 3 days straight. Her conclusion consisted of several dozen pages, but the main idea was simple. This is not a classic maniac or sadist. The person they were looking for didn't enjoy pain. His driving force was not anger but a distorted form of loneliness. The report stated, "The suspect demonstrates the traits of a sociopath with obsessive control over the environment. He is characterized by a need to create stable, repetitive situations where he is the sole ruler of order. Probably, he sought not to kill but to keep." Psychologists call this the mirroring syndrome, when a lonely person tries to create a perfect copy of the communication he or she lacks. The scene in the hut with the 2 plates is not a mockery but an imitation of the desired peace. He was trying to create the dinner he once lost by forcing another person to become part of that image. Federal analysts examined medical reports. Kira's death could have been caused by a combination of exhaustion and sleeping pills. A concentration of a drug commonly used to treat insomnia was found in her blood. This meant that the suspect could have given her the medication to keep her calm and obedient. Or, as the experts believed, the woman had asked for the drug herself, realizing that there was no way out. Dr. Carr emphasized that after Kira's death, the perpetrator remained in the hut for some time. This was confirmed by traces of candle wax and fresh shoe prints near the door. He would come in, sit down in front of the door, and continue the conversation. This is a manifestation of behavioral fixation. He could not accept the loss of control. Sheriff Maxwell listened carefully to the profiler's findings. For him, the story was no longer just a case. It turned into a question. Who is this person who can watch, wait, and learn from other people's lives for years? The FBI was simultaneously checking information from newspaper clippings found on the laptop. Archival materials confirmed that a tourist, 25-year-old Eliza Reed, had died in the Montana forests 15 years ago. She was traveling alone and died during a severe cold snap. Her death was classified as an accident. A special detail of the case was that the woman was found in a tent at a small field table. There were 2 plates and 2 mugs in front of her, arranged as if she was waiting for a guest. This detail confused even the investigators of the time, but they didn't find an explanation. A few days after the tragedy, the case was closed. The report stated that Eliza was survived by her younger brother, Liam. He was 10 when his sister died. After Eliza's death, the boy suffered a nervous breakdown. According to his relatives, he stopped talking, avoided people, and spent most of his time in the woods near their home. A few years later, he moved to another state and contact with him was cut off. The family believed that he had settled somewhere in Colorado or Wyoming. No one had ever seen him again. By comparing time and geography, the analysts concluded that the first disappearances of tourists in the San Juan area began about 2 years after Liam Reed disappeared from home. Now, the chain of events was becoming clear. In her report, Dr. Carr noted that the perpetrator's motive was based on loss. He was trying to get his sister back by reenacting the same scene, the dinner she never shared with anyone. The women who became his victims were chosen to resemble Eliza. Lonely, strong, with a camera in their hands. The sheriff looked at Kira's photo next to Eliza's newspaper picture. The resemblance was subtle but enough to realize that for some it could be a coincidence, for others a sign. Mark Gaines, who stayed in Silver Springs, received a brief report from the investigation. According to eyewitnesses, he remained silent for a long time, looking at old photos of his sister. Then he said only one thing: she reminded him of someone, and that's why she died. His words were recorded in the protocol. Now, for the first time, a name appeared in the case: Liam Reed. He was not listed as a criminal in the FBI's databases, had no criminal record, and left no financial traces. His profile was invisibility. He knew how to live outside the system, without an address, without documents, without witnesses. A man who had learned to disappear. The profiler warned that such individuals don't stop on their own. They repeat the cycle until they fix the mistakes of the past. Liam Reed was not looking for the pleasure of killing. He was looking for someone to stay. And if Kira's death destroyed his illusion, he will try to create it again. Silence fell in the sheriff's office. Leaves rustled outside the window, and 2 photographs of Eliza Reed and Kira Gaines lay on the desk. 2 women, 2 stories united by one ritual. Maxwell knew that what began 15 years ago in a snowy tent was not over. The end of October 2017. The fall in Colorado was quiet but crisp, and there was a sense of snow in the air. At the headquarters of the FBI's temporary operation in the town of Aurora, several agents and local police bent over maps of the slopes. They were working to apprehend a man who, for the first time in years, could be named by name: Liam Reed. After analyzing the data, the FBI profiler discovered a pattern. All of the man's victims disappeared in the fall in similar conditions. Alone, with cameras in mountain forests, Liam repeated the ritual, imitating his sister's tragedy. She had frozen in a tent, waiting for someone who never came. Now, he himself would come to those who were waiting. Federal agents compiled a list of potential victims, women who had registered hiking trails in Colorado's national parks for the second half of October. One of them was a 25-year-old blogger from Salt Lake City who traveled alone and regularly posted photos of her hikes. Her profile matched the description of the previous victims. The FBI decided to act. They set up surveillance at a tourist campsite near the Rio Grande Pass. Hidden cameras and posts with agents disguised as rescuers were set up in the valley where the blogger's route ran. The coordination center was located in a small wooden house a few miles away. Sheriff Greg Maxwell arrived there as an observer from the local authorities. According to the agent's testimony, the blogger started her hike on October 23rd at 9 o'clock in the morning. She had a registered permit, and no one suspected that she was being watched. The same evening, a signal with movement appeared in an area where, according to the foresters, there were no people. The camera captured the figure of a man in dark clothes carrying a backpack and a tripod. His gait was slow, cautious, as if he was not walking but sliding between the trees. A few shots made it possible to make the first confirmation. The facial features matched the archival photos of Liam Reed. He had not disappeared into the forest, as had been assumed, but lived among them, moving from place to place. Now he had chosen his victim again. Sheriff Maxwell reported this to Mark Gaines. According to eyewitnesses, he listened briefly without emotion. He didn't ask for details, only said he wanted to know when it was over. The FBI report states, the victim's relative refused to participate in the surveillance and remained in contact through the sheriff. On October 24th, around 11 o'clock in the morning, a surveillance operator detected movement near the blogger's camp. The cameras showed a shadow approaching her tent from the forest. The man stops, stands for a long time, then takes a small flashlight out of his pocket, and for a moment illuminates the sleeping woman's face through the tent fabric. It was at this moment that the agents received the signal to intervene. A group of 5 people was involved in the operation. They acted silently under the cover of trees and moonlight. When the man leaned over to open the tent zipper, one of the agents gave a sign, and the entire group came out of hiding. The suspect didn't have time to escape. He was detained without resistance. He didn't try to escape or resist. His face was calm, even indifferent. During the search, a pack of sleeping pills, a rope, a camera, and several printed photos of the woman he was following were found in his backpack. One of the pictures showed her sitting by a fire with a mug in her hand. A pencil signature at the bottom reads, Subject 21. In the temporary shelter where he lived for several weeks, the agents found an old laptop and notebook. The notebook contained the same observations as the computer they had found earlier: short notes without emotion, a chronology of movements, and the time of each photo. On the last page, there is only one phrase: "Now, they are all together." Liam Reed was silent during the transportation to the headquarters. The arrest report states, "The suspect showed signs of calm confusion, was aware of the nature of the detention, and did not object. During the first interrogation, he didn't answer any questions, only once raised his head, and according to the agents, spoke quietly. She's not alone anymore." The phrase remained in the report as the only words spoken by the suspect. For Maxwell, that was enough. The puzzle was complete. His ritual, his silence. His dinners were not an act of violence, but an attempt to resurrect the image of the sister he had once lost. During the search of his belongings in the tent, they found another photo, an old yellowed one. It shows a young girl in hiking gear sitting at a folding table. Next to her is a boy of about 10 years old. The caption on the back reads, "Eliza and Liam are hike." After his arrest, Liam was taken to a county detention center. He didn't demand a lawyer, didn't ask for a call, didn't explain anything. He just watched the wall as if waiting for someone who would never come. On the same day that the FBI officially announced the arrest, Mark Gaines arrived at the Denver cemetery. The autumn wind blew dry leaves between the marble slabs. On his sister's grave was a yellowed photograph she had taken many years ago of a sunrise in the mountains with the sun breaking through the fog. He left it there as an answer to a question that Liam Reed never heard. Kira Gaines' case was closed, but among the documents that Sheriff Maxwell kept in his safe, there was one unmarked folder containing a few photographs and a short report signed by the profiler. Motive: a distorted sense of salvation. The subject acted to give others what he could not give his sister. Presence: the forest became empty again, but every trail, every old hut in its depths now held the memory of those who had disappeared, and of the one who had tried to bring them back from their loneliness.